My name is Madison Harper, and I'm 34 years old. I never thought I'd watch my own father choose a gold digger and her spoiled daughter over me, but here I was, standing at his company's anniversary gala, staring at my stepsister Brittany sitting smugly in my designated VIP seat. The emerald necklace around her neck belonged to my grandmother, passed down through generations of Harper women, now decorating the throat of someone who'd been in our family for barely 3 years. My tech mogul husband Derek had just arrived from his business trip, his sharp eyes immediately catching the deliberate humiliation as I stood awkwardly by the back tables reserved for janitors and maintenance staff. His jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene, then he turned toward the stage where he was scheduled to make what everyone believed would be a major announcement. Before we dive into this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics or felt like an outsider in your own home, hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Growing up as the only child of tech company founder Robert Harper should have been a fairy tale, but fairy tales don't prepare you for stepmothers who make Cinderellas look like saints. My mother died when I was 12, leaving behind not just a grieving daughter and husband, but also her share of Harper Innovations, the company my father had built from nothing into a thriving tech enterprise worth millions. Those early years after Mom's death were just Dad and me against the world, and I threw myself into understanding every aspect of the business that would someday be mine. I spent summers filing papers in the accounting department, learning about client relationships from the sales team, and absorbing everything I could about the technology that made our products revolutionary. By the time I graduated with my business degree from Stanford, I wasn't just Robert Harper's daughter, I was his chosen successor, someone who'd earned every promotion through merit and dedication. I joined the company as a junior executive at 25, working my way up through legitimate achievements while other employees' children were still figuring out their majors. Everything changed 3 years ago when Dad married Diane, a woman who seemed to appear out of nowhere with her 26-year-old daughter Brittany in tow. Diane was beautiful in that artificial way that money can buy, with perfectly styled blonde hair, cosmetic surgery that erased any hint of her actual age, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. She'd swooped into Dad's life during his vulnerable period after a minor heart episode, playing the role of caring nurse and companion with Oscar-worthy performance skills. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that felt more like a business acquisition than a celebration of love. Diane immediately began her systematic campaign to rewrite the Harper family narrative, starting with subtle suggestions that I was too entitled and resistant to change. She painted herself as the voice of reason, claiming that family businesses needed fresh perspectives and objective leadership rather than nepotistic traditions. The first major betrayal came exactly 18 months after their wedding, when Dad announced that Brittany would be joining the company as Vice President of Strategic Development, a position that had been created specifically for me and promised since my college graduation. Brittany had a degree from some obscure college I'd never heard of, zero relevant work experience, and couldn't explain basic business concepts without referring to notes her mother had obviously prepared. When I confronted Dad about this decision, pointing out Brittany's complete lack of qualifications, he accused me of being jealous and unable to accept new family members. Diane stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she spoke about how hard it was to blend families when one person refused to be welcoming and supportive. The manipulation was masterful, turning my legitimate concerns about company welfare into character flaws that needed correction. That night, I called my college roommate Sarah, sobbing into the phone about feeling like a stranger in my own family's business. She reminded me of the tech conference in San Francisco that weekend, suggesting I needed to get out of town and clear my head. That conference changed everything, not because it solved my family problems, but because it introduced me to Derek Stallworth, the founder and CEO of Stellar Tech, a company that had revolutionized cloud computing solutions and was worth hundreds of millions. Derek was brilliant, successful, and most importantly, he saw value in me that had nothing to do with my last name or family connections. Our relationship moved quickly, built on mutual respect and shared passion for innovation rather than the toxic dynamics I'd grown accustomed to at home. We married within a year, and suddenly I had something my stepfamily couldn't touch or manipulate, a life and identity completely separate from Harper Innovations. Marriage to Derek should have provided relief from family drama, but instead it seemed to intensify Diane's campaign to erase me from the Harper legacy entirely. She began with psychological warfare, systematically removing traces of my childhood and my mother's memory from Dad's office and our family home. The framed photos of Mom and me that had sat on Dad's desk for over 20 years disappeared, replaced by professional portraits of Diane and Brittany posing like they'd always been Harper women. When I asked Dad about the missing pictures, he claimed he'd packed them away because they made Diane uncomfortable and it wasn't fair to expect her to compete with memories. The casual dismissal of my mother's existence felt like a physical blow, but it was just the beginning of a much more sophisticated psychological assault. Diane's next target was my inheritance and legal standing within the company. I discovered through casual conversation with our longtime family lawyer, Kenneth Morrison, that Diane had been scheduling private meetings to discuss updating estate planning documents and ensuring fair treatment for all family members. Kenneth, who'd been friends with my parents since before I was born, was clearly uncomfortable with these discussions but felt obligated to represent Dad's interests even when they conflicted with what he knew were Mom's wishes. He couldn't give me specific details due to attorney-client privilege, but his worried expressions and careful word choices painted a clear picture of someone trying to rewrite history in her favor. The woman who'd been in our family for less than 3 years was positioning herself and Brittany as the real Harper family while I became an inconvenient reminder of Dad's previous life. The third major attack on my position came in the form of a carefully orchestrated professional assassination attempt that demonstrated just how far Diane was willing to go to secure her daughter's future. Rumors began circulating within Harper Innovations that I was using my family connections to embezzle company funds, specifically that I was redirecting client payments to personal accounts and inflating expense reports for fictional business trips. The accusations were completely fabricated, but they spread through the office with the efficiency of a virus, poisoned by just enough specific details to seem credible. Diane had obviously done her homework, creating a narrative that explained my expensive lifestyle and recent marriage to Derek as evidence of financial corruption rather than legitimate success. The company's human resources department, following standard protocol, launched an internal investigation that required me to take temporary leave while they examined every transaction I'd ever processed. The humiliation of being escorted from my own family's building by security guards, while Diane watched from Dad's office window with barely concealed satisfaction, was devastating enough, but the real cruelty came from Dad's response to the allegations. Instead of defending me or questioning the convenient timing of these accusations, he publicly supported the investigation as necessary for maintaining company integrity and treating all employees equally regardless of family relationships. His willingness to believe I was capable of such betrayal, based on nothing more than Diane's carefully planted evidence, finally opened my eyes to how completely she'd manipulated his perception of reality. The man who'd once trusted me with his life's work now saw me as a potential criminal who needed to be investigated and controlled. Derek's reaction to my suspension was swift and decisive, hiring the best private investigators money could buy to uncover the truth behind these allegations. Within 2 weeks, his team had not only proven my innocence but also uncovered a paper trail of Diane's own financial improprieties, including kickbacks from vendors and falsified consulting contracts that funneled company money into accounts she controlled. More disturbing was what they discovered about her personal history: 2 previous marriages to wealthy older men, both of whom had died under circumstances that raised serious questions about their wives' involvement in their deaths. The evidence was compelling enough to take to law enforcement, but when I presented everything to Dad, begging him to see the pattern of manipulation and fraud, he chose Diane's tearful denials over documented proof of her criminal behavior. That moment of final rejection, watching him comfort the woman who was systematically destroying everything Mom had built, marked the end of my relationship with the father I'd once idolized. The Harper Innovations 25th Anniversary Gala represented everything I'd dreamed about since childhood: a celebration of the company my parents had built together and the legacy that was supposed to pass to me. I'd spent months working with the event coordinator, selecting the venue, approving the menu, and specifically requesting seating arrangements that would honor both the company's history and its future leadership. My table was positioned directly in front of the stage, surrounded by board members, major clients, and longtime family friends who'd watched me grow up within the business. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This was meant to be my unofficial introduction as Dad's successor, the moment when the business community would see me step into my rightful role as the next generation of Harper leadership. I'd even arranged for Derek to make a special announcement during the evening, something that would demonstrate his confidence in the company's future and strengthen our family's position in the industry. The morning of the gala, I spent hours preparing for what I expected to be one of the most important nights of my professional life. I'd chosen a navy blue designer dress that was elegant but authoritative, jewelry that included my mother's pearl earrings as a tribute to the woman who'd helped build the company we were celebrating. My hair was styled in a sophisticated updo that would photograph well for the business magazines covering the event, and I'd rehearsed talking points about the company's future direction in case reporters wanted quotes from the next generation of leadership. Derek had flown back from a business trip specifically for this event, understanding how much it meant to me and eager to finally meet some of the people who'd shaped my professional development over the years. Everything seemed perfectly orchestrated for a triumphant evening that would cement my position within both the company and the industry. Walking into the ballroom that evening felt like entering a nightmare instead of a celebration, because sitting at my carefully planned table, wearing my grandmother's emerald necklace and chatting comfortably with board members who should have been greeting me, was Brittany. She'd positioned herself in the exact seat I'd specified for myself, surrounded by place cards that had obviously been rearranged at the last minute to accommodate this seating change. The emerald necklace, which had been passed down through 3 generations of Harper women and was supposed to come to me after Mom's death, caught the light every time Brittany moved, sending sparkles across the white tablecloth like tiny green daggers aimed at my heart. She looked completely at ease in her stolen position, laughing at something one of our major clients had said and playing the role of gracious hostess with practiced skill. Diane appeared beside me with that infuriating smile that always preceded her most devastating attacks, explaining in a voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear that Brittany deserves recognition as Robert's real daughter now and that it was time for the company to embrace its future leadership. The implication was clear: I was the past, a relic of an earlier era that needed to step aside for the new generation represented by her daughter. When I pointed out that this was my seat, my event planning, and my family's company, Diane's expression shifted to one of wounded innocence as she claimed I was making a scene and embarrassing Robert with my selfish demands. Several guests had stopped their conversations to watch this confrontation, their expressions ranging from curiosity to uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing serious family dysfunction. Dad's arrival made everything infinitely worse, because instead of supporting me or questioning why his wife and stepdaughter had orchestrated this public humiliation, he immediately sided with Diane's version of events. He told me I was overreacting and needed to be more flexible about seating arrangements, as if this was some minor social preference rather than a deliberate attempt to erase me from my own family's celebration. The way he looked at me, with disappointment and frustration rather than understanding or protective anger, made it clear that Diane's campaign of manipulation had been completely successful in rewriting our family dynamics. I was no longer his beloved daughter and chosen successor. I was an obstacle to his new family's happiness and a source of unnecessary drama at what should have been a joyous occasion. The hostess directed me to a table at the back of the ballroom, positioned near the kitchen doors and populated by maintenance staff, janitors, and administrative assistants who looked just as confused by my presence as I felt by my exile. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or intentional, from the front row seat of honor to the back corner table where important guests' children might sit if space was limited. The whispered conversations that followed my humiliating trek across the ballroom were audible enough to catch fragments about the fallen daughter and family drama and gold-digger wives, making it clear that this public spectacle was being interpreted exactly as Diane had intended. I sat down heavily in my assigned chair, fighting back tears and struggling to maintain some semblance of dignity while feeling like my entire world was collapsing around me. Derek's entrance changed the energy in the room immediately, because even people who didn't recognize his face certainly recognized his reputation and the significance of his presence at this event. He'd flown directly from Los Angeles after closing a major deal, still wearing the exhaustion of travel but scanning the room with the sharp attention of someone accustomed to reading business situations quickly and accurately. His eyes found me at the back table within seconds, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to a cold fury that I'd rarely seen before. He made his way through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and exchange pleasantries with people who wanted to introduce themselves, but his focus never wavered from the obvious wrongness of my seating arrangement and the deliberate nature of this humiliation. When Derek finally reached my table, sliding into the chair beside me with controlled grace that belied his obvious anger, I broke down completely and told him everything. 3 years of systematic abuse, psychological manipulation, financial attacks, and gradual erasure from my own family's legacy came pouring out in whispered fragments as I explained how Diane had orchestrated this final public humiliation. I described the missing photographs, the stolen inheritance plans, the fabricated embezzlement charges, and the constant message that I didn't belong in the family I'd been born into. Derek listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each detail and his eyes growing colder as he began to understand the sophisticated cruelty of what I'd endured for years while trying to maintain some relationship with my father. The revelation that transformed Derek's anger into calculated vengeance came when he told me about the surprise he'd planned for this evening, a $6 million partnership deal between Stellar Tech and Harper Innovations that would have revolutionized both companies' market positions. For months, Derek had been quietly negotiating this partnership as a gift to me and my family, wanting to support the company I'd grown up loving while demonstrating his confidence in its future leadership under my direction. The deal would make Harper Innovations the exclusive supplier for Stellar Tech's new product line, representing a 30% increase in annual revenue and cementing our position as a major player in the tech industry. Derek had kept the negotiations secret, planning to announce the partnership tonight as a surprise that would simultaneously boost the company's stock price and publicly validate my role as the next generation of Harper leadership. The cruel irony wasn't lost on either of us that Derek had been planning to financially reward the very people who'd spent years systematically abusing and humiliating me. The $6 million partnership, negotiated in good faith as a gesture of family support, would now serve to enrich Diane and Brittany while further marginalizing me within the company structure. Derek's business acumen kicked into overdrive as he realized the full implications of this situation, not just the personal betrayal I'd endured but the professional negligence of partnering with a company whose leadership engaged in such toxic interpersonal dynamics. If Harper Innovations treated family members with this level of cruelty and manipulation, what did that say about their business ethics and decision-making processes when dealing with clients, vendors, and employees? Derek excused himself from our table, ostensibly to prepare for his scheduled announcement, but actually to make a series of phone calls that would determine the evening's ultimate direction. His first call was to his chief legal counsel, confirming the status of the partnership contract and his legal options for withdrawal before the deal became officially binding. The timing worked in our favor, since the contract required Derek's signature during tonight's public announcement to become legally enforceable, meaning he still had complete control over whether the partnership moved forward. His second call was to his chief financial officer, arranging for backup investment options that would allow Stellar Tech to pursue alternative partnerships if this deal fell through. Derek's business empire hadn't been built on emotional decisions, but rather on calculated risks and strategic positioning that protected his company's interests above all other considerations. The private investigator's report, which Derek had commissioned weeks earlier out of general curiosity about my family dynamics, suddenly became crucial intelligence for tonight's decision-making process. The documented evidence of Diane's criminal history, including detailed financial records from her previous marriages and suspicious circumstances surrounding both husbands' deaths, painted a picture of someone who systematically targeted wealthy men for financial exploitation. Derek realized that my father wasn't just a victim of gold digger manipulation, He was potentially in physical danger from someone whose previous relationships had ended with convenient deaths and large insurance payouts. The partnership deal, rather than supporting my family, would actually be providing financial resources to someone who might be planning to murder my father for his inheritance. As Derek prepared to take the stage for his announcement, he made one final call to his public relations team, instructing them to prepare immediate press releases about Stellar Tech's commitment to ethical business partnerships and family values. The decision to cancel the partnership wasn't just about protecting me from further humiliation, it was about positioning his company as one that refused to engage with organizations that demonstrated such fundamental failures of character and integrity. Derek understood that this public cancellation would have devastating consequences for Harper Innovation's stock price and industry reputation, but he also recognized that sometimes the most powerful message comes from walking away from profitable deals when they conflict with core values. The weight of what was about to happen settled over me as Derek squeezed my hand before walking toward the stage, because I knew him well enough to recognize the look of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. Part of me wanted to stop him, to beg him not to destroy my father's life's work for the sake of my wounded feelings, but another part of me understood that this wasn't really about revenge or even justice. This was about accountability, about forcing people to face the consequences of choices they'd made over years of systematic cruelty and manipulation. Diane and Brittany had built their positions within Harper Innovations on a foundation of lies and emotional abuse, and Derek was simply removing the financial support that enabled their continued parasitic behavior. Derek's approach to the podium commanded immediate attention from every person in the ballroom, because his reputation preceded him and everyone understood that his announcement could significantly impact Harper Innovations' future market position. The crowd quieted expectantly as he adjusted the microphone, his confident posture and professional demeanor suggesting that positive news was forthcoming. Stock prices for Harper Innovations had already begun climbing in after-hours trading based on rumors of a major partnership announcement, and several business journalists had positioned themselves near the stage to capture what they expected to be a significant moment in the company's 25-year history. Derek began his remarks by praising Harper Innovations' impressive track record and my father's visionary leadership in building the company from a small startup into a major industry player. The tone shift was subtle at first, as Derek transitioned from celebrating the company's past achievements to discussing the importance of family values and respect in business relationships. He spoke eloquently about how successful partnerships require mutual trust and shared ethical standards, emphasizing that Stellar Tech chose its business associates based not just on financial potential but also on character and integrity. The audience nodded approvingly at these sentiments, assuming they were leading toward announcement of a partnership that embodied these values. Derek's voice carried easily across the ballroom as he explained how witnessing certain behaviors tonight had forced him to re-evaluate whether Harper Innovations truly represented the kind of organization Stellar Tech wanted to align itself with publicly. The devastating revelation came when Derek described witnessing deeply disturbing treatment of a founding family member that revealed fundamental character flaws in current leadership. He didn't need to name names or point fingers, because everyone in the room could see Brittany sitting smugly in my displaced seat while I occupied a back table like an unwelcome guest at my own family's celebration. Derek's words carried the authority of someone whose business judgment was respected throughout the industry, lending credibility to his assessment that Harper Innovations had failed basic tests of loyalty and integrity. The gasps and murmurs from the audience grew louder as people began to understand that this wasn't going to be the positive announcement they'd expected. The official cancellation of the $6 million partnership deal landed like a bomb in the middle of the celebratory atmosphere, instantly transforming a victory party into a wake for Harper Innovations' financial future. Derek announced that Stellar Tech could not in good conscience partner with an organization that demonstrated such troubling patterns in family dynamics and executive decision-making, explaining that these behaviors suggested deeper problems with company culture and leadership judgment. He revealed that his investigation had uncovered concerning financial irregularities and questionable hiring practices that made Harper Innovations an unsuitable business partner for any reputable organization. The specificity of his language left no doubt that this wasn't a hasty emotional decision but rather a calculated business choice based on documented evidence of serious problems. The immediate impact on Harper Innovation's stock price was catastrophic, as investors watching the live stream began panic selling based on Derek's public rejection of the partnership and his ominous references to financial irregularities. The company's stock price, which had been climbing all week in anticipation of this announcement, began free-falling as algorithmic trading systems responded to keywords like irregularities, questionable practices, and unsuitable partner. Derek continued his remarks by announcing that Stellar Tech would be sharing its findings with relevant regulatory agencies and industry oversight organizations, ensuring that Harper Innovations would face scrutiny from multiple directions in the coming weeks and months. Derek's final comments focused on the importance of protecting vulnerable family members from psychological abuse and financial exploitation, explaining that successful businesses must demonstrate ethical leadership in both professional and personal relationships. He expressed hope that Harper Innovations could eventually address these serious character deficiencies and rebuild trust within both the industry and their own family structure, but made clear that any future partnership would require dramatic changes in leadership and company culture. The polite applause that followed his remarks felt hollow and uncomfortable, because everyone understood they'd witnessed not just a business decision but a public execution of the Harper family's reputation and financial stability. As Derek stepped down from the podium, the ballroom erupted in confused conversations as guests tried to process what they'd just witnessed and determine how this development would affect their own business relationships with Harper Innovations. Several major clients immediately began making phone calls, presumably to reassess contracts and partnership agreements in light of Derek's revelations about financial irregularities and ethical problems. The celebration that was supposed to mark Harper Innovations' silver anniversary had become instead a very public funeral for the company's future prospects, broadcast live to industry leaders and potential investors who would remember this moment for years to come. The chaos that followed Derek's announcement was immediate and absolute, as guests began filing toward the exits while investors huddled in corners making frantic phone calls to their financial advisors and business partners. The carefully orchestrated celebration dissolved into panicked conversations about damage control and stock positions, with several board members demanding emergency meetings to address the crisis that had just been dropped on them without warning. Dad's face had gone completely white during Derek's speech, and now he was standing frozen beside the head table, seemingly unable to process that his company's future had just been destroyed in front of 200 of his closest business associates and industry competitors. The 25-year anniversary that was supposed to cement his legacy as a successful entrepreneur had instead become the moment when everything he'd built began crumbling in the most public way possible. Dad's confrontation with Derek and me was explosive and desperate, fueled by the kind of rage that comes from watching a lifetime of work disappear in a matter of minutes. He accused us of conspiring to destroy his company out of spite and jealousy, claiming that we'd orchestrated this vindictive attack because I couldn't accept that Brittany was now part of the family. His voice carried across the nearly empty ballroom as he demanded to know how we could be so cruel and selfish, destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of employees just to settle some petty family dispute. The complete lack of self-awareness in his accusations was staggering, because even in this moment of crisis, he couldn't see that his own choices had created the situation that led to Derek's decision to withdraw the partnership offer. 3 years of suppressed rage and accumulated pain came pouring out of me in a torrent of accusations and revelations that I'd never intended to voice publicly. I detailed every manipulation, every slight, every moment when Dad had chosen Diane's lies over my documented evidence of her criminal behavior and financial fraud. The missing photographs, the stolen inheritance discussions, the fabricated embezzlement charges, the systematic erasure of my mother's memory, all of it spilled out in a voice that grew stronger and more furious with each revelation. I told him about Derek's private investigator findings regarding Diane's history of targeting wealthy widowers, the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands, and the very real possibility that he was in physical danger from someone who viewed him as a financial target rather than a beloved partner. Dad's initial refusal to believe these accusations crumbled when other guests, many of whom had been filming the confrontation on their phones, began sharing their own observations about Diane's manipulative behavior over the past 3 years. Several longtime family friends stepped forward to admit they'd witnessed concerning interactions but hadn't wanted to interfere in family matters, describing incidents where Diane had made inappropriate comments about Dad's will and inheritance plans. The company's longtime accountant revealed that Diane had been asking detailed questions about business finances and asset valuations, information that had nothing to do with her role as Dad's wife but everything to do with planning for his eventual death. Diane's carefully constructed facade finally shattered under the weight of this public scrutiny, revealing the calculating predator that Derek's investigators had documented in their report. Instead of maintaining her victim persona, she launched into a vicious verbal attack on my character, calling me an ungrateful, entitled brat who couldn't accept that Dad had found happiness with someone new. Her mask slipped completely as she detailed her plans to modernize the Harper legacy and ensure that people who actually appreciate Robert's generosity would inherit his life's work. The venomous hatred in her voice as she described me as a spoiled princess who'd never earned anything through real merit was shocking enough to silence the remaining guests who were still processing Derek's earlier revelations. Brittany's participation in her mother's schemes became clear when she joined Diane's attack, revealing that she'd known about the manipulation and financial fraud all along but hadn't cared because it served her interests to displace me as Dad's heir. She laughed about how easy it had been to convince Dad that I was embezzling company funds, describing the fabricated evidence as surprisingly simple to create using basic accounting software and forged documentation. Her casual admission of participating in criminal fraud, delivered with the smugness of someone who thought she was untouchable, provided the final piece of evidence that Derek's investigators needed to build a comprehensive case against both women. The security camera footage that building management provided later that evening showed Diane systematically removing company assets over several months, including expensive artwork, historical documents, and even office equipment that she'd claimed needed updating. The systematic nature of this theft, combined with her manipulation of Dad's emotional state and her daughter's fraudulent credentials, painted a picture of a sophisticated long-term scheme designed to strip the company of both financial assets and family ownership. Dad's business partners, who'd been watching this confrontation with growing alarm, began distancing themselves immediately, with several threatening lawsuits if they suffered financial losses due to association with Harper Innovations' damaged reputation. As Derek and I left the devastated ballroom, walking past the remaining debris of what should have been a celebration, I felt simultaneously vindicated and horrified by the destruction that had been necessary to expose the truth about my stepfamily's criminal behavior. The father I'd once idolized had chosen money and status over his own daughter's well-being, enabling abusive behavior for years while refusing to acknowledge evidence that could have protected both of us from Diane's predatory schemes. The Harper Innovations that my mother and father had built together was already dying, killed not by external competition or market forces but by internal rot that had been eating away at its foundation for 3 years. The financial devastation that followed Derek's public cancellation of the partnership deal was swift and merciless, driven by algorithmic trading systems that responded to negative keywords faster than human investors could process the implications of his announcement. Harper Innovations' stock price plummeted 40% in the first hour after Derek's speech, wiping out millions in shareholder value and triggering automatic sell orders that accelerated the decline. By morning, the company had lost over 60% of its market capitalization, transforming it from a stable mid-cap technology firm into a distressed asset that institutional investors were abandoning as quickly as possible. Derek's business network, which included some of the most influential technology executives in Silicon Valley, began implementing an informal but highly effective blacklist that made Harper Innovations untouchable for any major partnership or acquisition discussions. Diane's desperate attempt to control the narrative through media manipulation revealed just how sophisticated her long-term planning had been, because she'd clearly prepared for the possibility that her schemes might be exposed publicly. She hired an expensive public relations firm to paint me as a vindictive daughter who'd conspired with her wealthy husband to destroy a family business out of jealousy and spite. Her version of events portrayed her as a loving stepmother who'd tried to bring peace to a fractured family, only to face vicious attacks from someone who couldn't accept that her father had found happiness with a new partner. The media strategy was clever, focusing on sympathetic elements like Diane's role as a caring wife and Brittany's position as an innocent victim of family politics, while avoiding any mention of the documented evidence that Derek's investigators had uncovered. The counterattack came from an unexpected source when former Harper Innovations employees began speaking publicly about Diane's behavior during her time at the company. Longtime administrative staff revealed that Diane had been asking inappropriate questions about executive compensation, company assets, and succession planning from almost the moment she'd married Dad. The head of human resources, who'd been with the company for 15 years, described a pattern of manipulative behavior that included attempts to access confidential personnel files and pressure to hire unqualified candidates who happened to be Diane's personal friends. These revelations provided crucial context for understanding that Diane's abuse of me was part of a much larger scheme to gain control over company operations and financial resources. The legal investigation that Derek had threatened during his speech became reality when federal authorities opened a formal inquiry into Harper Innovations' financial practices, focusing specifically on irregularities that appeared to coincide with Diane's increased involvement in company affairs. Bank records revealed a pattern of questionable transactions, including payments to consulting firms that existed only on paper and equipment purchases from vendors who were later discovered to be shell companies controlled by associates of Diane's. The sophistication of this financial fraud suggested that Diane had experience with corporate embezzlement, supporting Derek's investigators' findings about her history of targeting wealthy men for financial exploitation. Brittany's fraudulent credentials became a major scandal when journalists investigating the Harper family discovered that her college degree came from a diploma mill that had been shut down by federal authorities for selling fake academic credentials. Her work history, which claimed executive positions at several prestigious firms, was entirely fabricated, with the companies in question having no record of her employment. The revelation that Harper Innovations had appointed someone with completely false qualifications to a senior executive position raised serious questions about the company's due diligence processes and Dad's judgment as chief executive officer. Shareholders filed lawsuits demanding Dad's removal from leadership, claiming that his poor decision-making had directly contributed to the company's financial losses. The board revolt that followed was inevitable, as directors who'd trusted Dad's leadership for decades suddenly found themselves liable for decisions they'd supported based on incomplete or deliberately misleading information. Several board members had personal investment portfolios that included significant Harper Innovations holdings, meaning they'd lost substantial personal wealth due to the stock price collapse that followed Derek's announcement. The emergency board meeting that was called to address the crisis lasted 14 hours, with heated discussions about whether Dad could remain as CEO given the evidence of poor judgment and possible criminal liability related to Diane's embezzlement schemes. The board ultimately voted to place him on administrative leave pending completion of the federal investigation, effectively removing him from day-to-day control over the company he'd founded. When the board offered me the CEO position as a desperate attempt to restore credibility and family leadership to the company, Derek supported my decision to refuse the offer, understanding that I needed distance from the toxic dynamics that had consumed my family for 3 years. Taking control of Harper Innovations would have meant inheriting a company facing federal investigation, massive lawsuits, and industry-wide reputation damage, not to mention the ongoing legal complications related to Diane and Brittany's criminal activities. More importantly, Derek recognized that my healing process required stepping away from the source of trauma rather than trying to rescue an organization that had enabled my abuse for years. His business advice was sound. Sometimes the best way to win is to walk away from games that are rigged against you. The FBI investigation into Diane's background expanded beyond Harper Innovations when authorities discovered connections between her current activities and the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands. Forensic accountants found evidence that she'd systematically drained the assets of both men before their convenient deaths from apparent heart attacks, despite neither having any history of cardiac problems. The pattern was consistent enough to warrant exhumation orders for both bodies, leading to toxicology tests that revealed traces of substances that could have caused cardiac arrest in otherwise healthy individuals. Diane's arrest for murder came just 6 weeks after the gala, transforming her from a grieving stepmother into the lead suspect in a multi-state investigation of serial spousal homicide. Harper Innovations' bankruptcy filing came exactly 90 days after the anniversary gala, marking the complete destruction of everything Dad had spent 25 years building. The company that had once employed over 300 people and generated millions in annual revenue was forced to liquidate its assets to pay creditors, with the remaining funds disappearing into legal fees and settlement payments to investors who'd lost money in the stock collapse. Dad's personal financial situation was equally devastating, as his wealth had been tied primarily to company stock that was now worthless, leaving him facing potential criminal charges without the resources to mount an effective legal defense. The man who'd once been respected throughout the technology industry was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting personal relationships cloud business judgment. The stress of watching his life's work collapse while facing possible criminal prosecution took a severe toll on Dad's health, culminating in a major heart attack that required emergency surgery and weeks of intensive care. Despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't abandon him completely during this medical crisis, so I spent long hours at the hospital monitoring his condition and making decisions about his care while Diane sat in federal custody awaiting trial. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was protecting the man who'd chosen his wife's lies over his daughter's documented evidence, but my mother had raised me to value compassion over revenge, even when dealing with people who'd caused tremendous pain through their poor choices. Dad's bedside confession was both heartbreaking and infuriating, as he finally acknowledged the years of willful blindness that had enabled Diane's abuse and manipulation. He admitted that he'd seen warning signs about her behavior but had chosen to ignore them because he was afraid of being alone and grateful for the attention she provided during his vulnerable period after his heart episode. His apology for choosing a predatory stranger over his own daughter was sincere but inadequate, because words couldn't undo 3 years of psychological abuse or restore the relationship we'd once shared. The damage went deeper than hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about fundamental trust that had been broken when he'd repeatedly chosen to believe lies rather than investigate truth. Diane's disappearance with the remaining liquid assets from Dad's personal accounts demonstrated just how thoroughly she'd planned for the possibility of exposure and arrest. Federal marshals discovered that she'd been systematically transferring money to offshore accounts for months before the gala, suggesting that she'd anticipated the need for a quick escape and financial resources to disappear permanently. The woman who'd played the role of loving wife and devoted stepmother had been planning her exit strategy almost from the moment she'd entered our family, treating Dad as nothing more than a mark in an elaborate confidence scheme. Her ability to maintain the deception while simultaneously preparing for betrayal showed a level of calculation that bordered on psychopathic. Brittany's arrest while attempting to flee the country with stolen company funds provided the final confirmation that both women had been working together in a coordinated scheme to drain Harper Innovations of every possible asset before disappearing with their ill-gotten gains. Airport security found her with over $200,000 in cash, fake identification documents, and detailed records of Swiss bank accounts that contained additional stolen funds. Her cooperation with federal investigators, motivated by the desire to receive a lighter sentence in exchange for testifying against her mother, revealed the full scope of Diane's criminal enterprise and provided crucial evidence for the murder investigation related to her previous husband's deaths. The psychological toll of discovering that my entire family structure had been built on lies and manipulation required months of intensive therapy to process and overcome. Derek found me the best trauma specialists money could buy, professionals who understood the unique challenges of healing from systematic psychological abuse within family relationships. The hardest part wasn't dealing with anger or resentment, but rather grieving the loss of the father I'd thought I knew while accepting that he'd been replaced by someone whose judgment was so compromised that he'd enabled criminal behavior for years. Learning to separate the man who'd raised me from the man who'd chosen my abuser over my well-being was essential for my healing but emotionally devastating. The broader business community's reaction to the Harper Innovations scandal provided an unexpected source of validation, as numerous executives reached out to offer support and job opportunities based on their recognition that I'd been the victim of sophisticated manipulation rather than a participant in family drama. Derek's network of technology leaders understood that my departure from the family company represented wisdom rather than disloyalty, and several offered positions that would allow me to rebuild my career based on merit rather than family connections. The irony was that losing everything I'd thought I wanted from Harper Innovations opened doors to opportunities that were actually better suited to my skills and ambitions. Dad's plea bargain with federal prosecutors allowed him to avoid prison time in exchange for cooperation with the investigation into Diane's criminal activities, but it also required him to accept responsibility for the poor business judgment that had enabled her embezzlement scheme. His community service sentence and substantial financial penalties meant that he would spend his remaining years in relative poverty, dependent on Social Security rather than the comfortable retirement he'd planned based on company stock and personal investments. The man who'd once been worth millions was now facing old age with minimal resources and a damaged reputation that would follow him for the rest of his life. 6 months after the anniversary gala that destroyed my family's business and exposed years of criminal manipulation, I was sitting in the executive conference room of my own technology consulting firm, reviewing quarterly results that exceeded every projection I'd made when Derek and I decided to launch this venture together. Madison Harper Consulting had grown from a business plan sketched on napkins during my therapy sessions into a thriving enterprise that specialized in helping family-owned businesses navigate succession planning, leadership transitions, and corporate governance challenges. The painful experience of watching Harper Innovations collapse due to poor family dynamics had given me unique insights into the warning signs of toxic relationships and predatory behavior within business environments. Diane's conviction on multiple felony charges, including murder in the first degree for the deaths of her 2 previous husbands, brought a sense of justice that I hadn't expected to feel given the devastation she'd caused to my family. The 15-year sentence she received was actually lenient compared to what prosecutors had originally sought, but it ensured that she would spend her most productive years in federal prison rather than targeting other vulnerable widowers for financial exploitation. The civil lawsuits that followed her criminal conviction allowed Dad and the families of her previous victims to recover some of the stolen assets, though the emotional damage she'd caused could never be fully compensated through monetary settlements. Brittany's cooperation with federal investigators earned her a reduced sentence of 3 years in minimum security prison, but it also meant that she would be forever known as someone who'd participated in embezzlement and fraud against her own stepfather's company. Her testimony provided crucial details about Diane's long-term planning and criminal methods, helping prosecutors understand how sophisticated the scheme had been from its inception. The young woman who'd once sat smugly in my seat at the anniversary gala was now facing the reality that her privileged lifestyle had been built entirely on criminal proceeds and that her mother had been planning to abandon her along with everyone else when the inevitable exposure came. Dad's recovery from his heart attack was slow but steady, complicated by the depression that came from realizing how completely he'd been manipulated and how much damage his poor judgment had caused to everyone around him. Our relationship remained strained but was gradually healing through family counseling sessions that helped us both understand how Diane's psychological manipulation had exploited his grief and loneliness after Mom's death. He was finally able to acknowledge that his treatment of me had been inexcusable regardless of his emotional state, and that choosing to believe lies rather than investigate documented evidence had been a betrayal of everything my mother had valued about family loyalty and integrity. The speaking engagements that resulted from my consulting firm's success allowed me to share the painful lessons I'd learned about family business dynamics, psychological manipulation, and the importance of protecting vulnerable family members from predatory behavior. Standing on stages across the country, telling my story to audiences of business owners and family enterprise leaders, transformed my personal trauma into valuable education that could help others avoid similar devastating experiences. The questions I received after these presentations revealed how common these dynamics were in family businesses, and how many people were struggling with similar issues but felt isolated and unable to seek help. Derek and Madison Harper Consulting's partnership with several major business schools created academic case studies that would be used to teach future business leaders about corporate governance, family dynamics, and ethical decision-making in high-pressure situations. Our marriage had been strengthened rather than damaged by the crisis we'd weathered together, because Derek's unwavering support during my darkest period had proven that true partnership means protecting each other from harm even when it requires difficult sacrifices. The man who'd walked away from a $6 million deal to defend my dignity had shown me what authentic love looked like compared to the conditional approval I'd received from family members who'd abandoned me when it became inconvenient to support me. The final resolution came during a business conference in Chicago, where I was delivering a keynote address about building resilience after family betrayal, when I realized that I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me but rather by what I'd built from the ashes of that destruction. The audience of successful entrepreneurs and family business leaders who gave me a standing ovation weren't applauding my victimhood, but rather my transformation of painful experience into valuable wisdom that could benefit others facing similar challenges. I discovered that true success isn't about inheriting what previous generations created, but about having the courage to build something new when existing structures prove to be toxic or unsustainable. The peace I'd found came not from forgiveness or reconciliation, but from acceptance that some relationships are too damaged to repair and that protecting yourself sometimes requires walking away from people and situations that cause ongoing harm. My mother's memory lived on not in the company that bore her name but in the values she'd taught me about integrity, compassion, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your success rather than undermining it out of jealousy or greed. The Harper legacy would continue through my work helping other families navigate similar challenges, ensuring that future generations could learn from our mistakes and build stronger, healthier family enterprises. Standing in my office today, looking at the wall of thank you letters from families we've helped avoid the kind of destruction that consumed Harper Innovations, I understand that losing everything I'd thought I wanted was actually the beginning of finding what I truly needed. The seat that was stolen from me at that anniversary gala had been nothing more than a symbol of approval from people whose judgment had been corrupted by greed and manipulation, but the platform I'd built through my consulting work represented something far more valuable: the ability to transform suffering into service and to help others find strength they didn't know they possessed when facing their own family crises. Have you ever been betrayed by family members who chose money or status over your well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below, because knowing we're not alone in these struggles can be incredibly healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it who might need to hear this message of hope and resilience. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and building authentic success on your own terms. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with toxic family dynamics, because sometimes we all need reminding that we deserve better treatment than what we've been accepting. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in supporting each other through life's most difficult challenges. Remember that your worth isn't determined by family approval, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from relationships that consistently cause you pain. Here's to building families of choice that celebrate your authentic self rather than demanding that you diminish yourself for their comfort.